Newcastle, because I'd like to ask you about the implications for Newcastle potentially regarding City's case, and actually what that could mean for them if City are to win this ongoing case that they're facing.
Well, obviously, yeah, for Newcastle, they've found themselves in a bit of a tricky situation with PSR and FFP, especially in the last transfer window when they were maybe going to be forced to sell some of their best players. They managed to keep hold of them. Again, their budget has been restricted in this upcoming summer transfer window because of the right on the fringes of FFP and PSR. If we'll go back to the Manchester City case, if they were to win this legal case against obviously the APT rules with the Premier League, it opens things up for Newcastle because they've got the finances there to really go and invest as much money as they possibly want. They could go out there and get so many commercial sponsorship deals from Saudi Arabia. And again, that would be very lucrative, no doubts about that. And obviously then that would allow them to go out and be overcome the PSR regulations, have limitless funds to go out and spend as well. And that would obviously only be positive for Newcastle and Eddie Howe. If they wanted to close the gap on the rest, they're probably secretly hoping that Manchester City are successful in this legal appeal against the APT rules as well, because it will give them greater leeway to spend the money that the club obviously have got. We know that, and the owners are willing to invest, but just under the current regulations, they're not able to do that.
Paul, do you think there's any chance that actually Newcastle could help City out during this case eventually? Like Pete's mentioned there are some clubs that sort of might be siding with City. So actually it turns out that there might be 2 against 18 Premier League clubs or 3 against 17. Could we see Newcastle sort of join forces with them to go ahead and push for the arguments that they're putting forwards?
I think Newcastle will be very interested spectators in this case. Let's just say that to start with. I don't see there's a need for them to get involved at the moment. I think they'll be there. They're secretly behind the scenes in the boardroom, talking amongst each other. Well, go on, Man City, off you go. Let's see how you get on. Go on. And you go first. If you're successful, it's fantastic for us, and we'll follow you, type thing. But at the moment, I don't see there's any benefit for Newcastle wading in. They just sit back, see what happens, let Manchester City fight the battle. And if there's any kind of encouragement that there is going to be a ruling for Manchester City in favour, then that might encourage Newcastle to do a similar type of thing. It's difficult because how do you stop the rich getting richer? This is, we speak about this all the time. There's got to be some kind of financial fair play, some kind of financial regulations put in there. But actually, Newcastle, the richest club in the world, struggling to close the gap on the top 2, top 3 because of their inability to spend because of these rules. Nottingham Forest, 23 years out of the Premier League, not allowed to spend what the owner wants to spend and grow the club and expand the club. But also, there's an argument for both sides because of Forest situation. You've got an owner there who's willing to spend, wants to spend, can't grow the club as quickly as he wants to because of these rules. But then you've also got the other end of the spectrum of Manchester City, who are in the Galactico stage, who could just run away and just be the powerhouse that they are for a number of years. So we're trying to get a fair and even playing field. The answer to that, I don't know, is how you do that. But for Newcastle, to your original question, I don't see any benefit for them wading into this debate until there's some kind of outcome, because they can sit back, and if City are encouraged with their outcome, the verdict falls in the favour of City. Or even if it was, just half, some kind of encouragement within that verdict for Manchester City would then spark Newcastle's interest. But at the moment, I think they'll just be an interested spectator.
And Pete, if City are to win, I know we've discussed many times in this podcast, Isak, Bruno Guimaraes, the future of some of those stars. Would you anticipate that some of them would then be tied down to bumper deals, and actually we could see unprecedented cash for someone like Bruno Guimaraes, say, to keep him, because actually they would then be able to keep hold of their top players?
Yeah, obviously, if those commercial and sponsorship payments aren't restricted, there could be no limit to the investment that Newcastle owners want to put into the club, which could only benefit them. They have no fears of potentially losing their best players, which has been hanging over them for the last 6 months. Obviously, Bruno Guimaraes has got this 100 million release clause in his contract as well, which obviously Newcastle are anxiously waiting to see if that's not activated before this June 30th deadline. Again, obviously, we know the June 30th deadline is when clubs need to file their accounts for this season as well, and that's why we're having this probably unofficial transfer window coming up when some of the clubs who are on the brink of FFP, PSR need to sell players. As I said, Newcastle are right on the brink of that. And obviously Eddie Howe is going to have his work cut out in this summer transfer window, I think. He's not going to be able to go out there and spend as much as he wants, which means he will miss out on a lot of his top targets because they will go to other clubs who can afford them. So if these rules were to be scrapped, Newcastle could compete with anybody in the world financially. They could offer huge deals to players, tie down their best players to new contracts. I think talks are ongoing with Isak right now anyway about a new contract, and the player himself has publicly come out and said he's happy at the club. He loves the area and everything else. So that was encouraging for Newcastle as well. But as I said, I think you saw recently when they announced the release list, some long-serving players were let go, and Eddie Howe ideally would have liked to have kept them, especially if they had qualified for Europe. But I think finances dictated that the likes of Paul Dummett, Matt Ritchie were released and were moved on, because just to help with Newcastle's overall budget and to allow them maybe to spend some money in this summer transfer window. But if these rules are scrapped, it's limitless what Newcastle could potentially spend, and again, it would allow them to close the gap on those top Premier League clubs sooner rather than they expected.
I mean, talking to some of those free agents that have just left, Pete, do we have any transfer news, please? Are we expecting them to replace some of those long-term servants, or actually are there any specific targets we can mention heading towards that June 30th deadline for other teams?
Yeah, obviously, Newcastle are looking to strengthen the squad. They're looking to bring in another goalkeeper. Obviously, there was links with Aaron Ramsdale, which myself and Paul were pretty sceptical about. I don't see that happening for the life of me. I think they'll be looking to bring in a number 2. James Trafford of Burnley is somebody who is on their radar, and obviously a very highly rated young keeper. He's part of the England squad at the minute for the Euros, but which again, I'd imagine he might get left out when Gareth Southgate whittles that down to 26 players. They do want a centre-back. We know how much injury problems they've got there with the likes of Lascelles injured, and obviously Fabian Schär has had his injuries as well, and Botman's out long-term. So I think Lloyd Kelly's a deal that they will get over the line from Bournemouth, a free agent, so works perfectly for Newcastle monetary-wise as well, that it won't affect their budget too much as well. And I think right winger is another position that Eddie Howe would like to bring in, being linked with the likes of Jared Bowen, Nico Williams, Crescencio Somerville. Again, those 3 players could maybe be outside Newcastle's price range this summer as well. And I do think they would like to bring in another striker to work under Isak and Callum Wilson. So, yeah, I think Lloyd Kelly's a deal that makes a lot of sense for Newcastle, because he can play centre-back and he can also play left-back and will help fill the voids of those injuries. And also Paul Dummett, who's left on a free transfer as well.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.